Now, when I discussed a while back about why modern Disney villains suck, I also started to question most modern Disney heroes as well. It's something that I've also questioned in regards to Marvel's heroes showcasing their unlikable track record, but looking back on this overall issue, it is very heartbreaking for what once was the main focal point of their very movies. Now, this has been an issue that is more newer than the modern Disney villains, but extends back about 5 years with the likes of Ralph Breaks the Internet being the studio's first major sequel in almost 30 years. A one where most of their traits do not match up the heroes of what once was. The main characters of Ralph and Vanellope are insufferable to the max, removing any trait that they once shared for in Wreck-It Ralph. This film is a lesson to how to destroy the hero's journey, and there is nothing remotely here interesting or compelling about their characters or arcs and personalities. The film mainly portrays Ralph in this sense as clingy man-baby who never learns any of the lessons from his very first movie, like game jumping, hanging out with a girl who's about 2 decades younger than him, or getting butthurt at negative comments on the internet. It's one that demonstrates a clear lack of understanding of the previous story, which never made any sense since most of the original crew returned to this one, and rather says that this one was made via the decisions of the higher ups at Disney to primarily sell their brand straight to our faces. The main point of this movie is an advertisement of big brands that you find on the internet rather than an actual story like they did primarily with video games and arcades. And having Vanellope along him extends this point into destroying her character as a whole and what happened during the final act of the first film, accepting her role as leader of Sugar Rush. And this movie just really forgot about that entire leadership role, where it acts more like she became a part of the game as another racer and nothing more, instead of the president or princess that she once was. Like, what does that really tell you about her character arc in between films? Absolutely nothing, in my opinion, where they tried to set up her having this conflict about wanting more and newer unpredictable challenges instead of stuck in the same shallow state that she's in, from her own game that is, despite being adored by the general public when they play Sugar Rush. It's also horrendous to think that it's the Disney princesses themselves that sort of plant the seeds to convince Vanellope to game jump because she just likes this newer game better, not thinking of any of the consequences of the original because none of that ever actually mattered apparently. I really think beyond Ralph, she is actually the worst modern Disney hero at this point about what she does and what she wants that forms the events of the movies. Like, how can you justify anything in this movie if it's going to be like that when you establish a set of rules but automatically disregard them because you wanted this story instead? I just said she accepted everything at the end of the first movie, and now you're just fine about her moving on to this new game she isn't even supposed to be a part of or fit its design wise. I mean, in my review I said it's not going to make any sense because tons of people will notice this change, especially the game developers, which would result in panic because this character is from a different game, and we all know what happens when one person decides to use something that's similar in asset of another company's, a big ass lawsuit. Like, they really never thought about the real life logical consequences that happens throughout the course of the movie and just did this because they can, just to sell Disney as a whole. This movie doesn't really serve them properly as heroes as what the first one did, with Ralph going through this process and learning from his mistakes, where this one has hardly anything to offer for him anymore, focusing on his insecurities for not letting his friend do what she wants to be focused on rather than his experiences that he went through in that first film. The same stuff that we actually see Vanellope go through at the beginning of the film. Like, they never once thought about that plot point, and then that makes this movie so infuriating because her character arc is the same one that Ralph went through, and that is something his character should have understood from the very beginning. But if anything is to go by with the late 2010s, it was just nothing but filled with consumed product references everywhere and nothing else. And the main reason I highlight this is the same one that comes up in other Disney sequels, where Vanellope leaves her game at the very end of the movie, just erasing her arc she had to begin with, because that is exactly what Elsa and Woody did, as I mentioned many times before. Because mentioning Toy Story 4, it shows a movie that didn't need to exist and mostly destroyed Bonnie's and Woody's character from the previous movie. I don't want to spend too much time on this either because I've already explained it better in my Toy Story 4 video about the arc that Woody goes through. It makes no sense because, you know, he just loves Bo Peep and wanted to be with her this time because Bonnie somehow forgot about him, despite Andy putting a high significance to his character and how actually Bonnie loved playing with him in Toy Story 3, but now only showing a year after she decided to forget him and contribute to the shallow plot of him finally leaving to convince the audience that they need this unconvincing emotional goodbye at the end of the film. Like, throughout this film, he contributes to ensuring Forky is safe with Bonnie and promises to stay, but the film just forgot about all these shorts and previous movies due to this new reality that you could not actually continue Toy Story beyond the ending of the third movie. And it's just so wrong that this is going to get a sequel in Toy Story 5 because there is no way you can justify continuing this story in any way when, like with Ralph, you just moved your character away from the last film that didn't justify any of it happening at all. These heroes aren't heroes because they're now removed from the world now. I mean, it's not to say that they don't have happy endings this way if one film can do that, but this involves the entire course of the story from the very first film to the last, where you cannot justify their stories ending up the way that they are from their previous arcs that were built and satisfied by their endings. Where to continue and cap this specific era off was in fact Elsa in Frozen 2. Like Ralph, it cannot justify any reason why she should leave Arendelle as queen to help the people in the forest. It tries to set up these ideas in the beginning, but all of the film's ideas and concepts are just too terrible and too rushed to bring any reason to their decisions. It's so weird how these sequels just wanted to do the same thing and not learn any of the lessons from their twist villains to see how it's not always a good idea to try again, because clearly they could not do that. This movie has nothing going for it story-wise, and putting her in this position at the end of the movie is insulting to everything you built up before, in my opinion, especially that final climactic arc in Frozen. And of course, this is probably due to the rush trouble production of the very film, which is appalling on Disney's end for not actually providing us with something, because you know, they just had to meet the schedules for like 2019, and 2019 was their most successful year in terms of films financially before 2020 broke everyone to pieces. Its ending is truly one of the worst that I've ever seen in a Disney film, and doesn't give any time for Anna to become queen because it's just there, and Elsa is just there in the woods because there was nothing for her to do or anyone else to have in this sequel. To sum up why this movie's heroes suck is because one keeps chasing a voice and running away from her sister, the sister becomes obsessed way too much over her sister, and the last one just gets third wheel doing nothing but singing a song about his relationship with Anna, whom she also forgot about. Like many said when this came out, these movies are nothing but a showcase of Disney's 3D animation power. Like they're just trying to say, look how far we come in animation, rather than focusing on the more important elements of the story to begin with. And finally, closing this era of abandonment issues comes this newer era of different heroes finally that still suck, that starts with the likes of Raya. Everyone knows now that most of this movie comes down to its trust issues, where it tries time and time again to have Raya trust people after someone betrayed her trust at the beginning of the film that set the events of the world in motion. This is the film where the reason the main hero sucks is because the main villain sucks, all by trying to convince everybody that she wasn't one to begin with. Namari's actions are the reasons why the mess is here to begin with, and the trust issue that Raya has that the film's characters, especially Sisu, blames Raya for in the course of the entire film. So of course, this involves Sisu as the hero in that conversation, because she is a truly awful Disney character who is constantly annoying throughout, who trying to hamper this silly message that you either don't trust someone or you do completely 100% no matter the consequences. And there's little feints here about she's opened her eyes to blindly trusting someone, but that point just goes nowhere because she's the one who's supposed to trust people. The agonizing pain you experience in this movie is because of that stupid ass dragon never understood what Raya went through in the beginning, because of this stupid ass villain destroying everything to begin with, where I really wish they sacrificed her for the ending of the movie to save everyone, because that would just be much better and satisfying for a character who didn't deserve anything at all. Like literally the events that they set up, because Namari is a villain. And as a hero, you must learn to how there are certain degrees you must put into certain aspects of life, such as trust, but as for Raya in this film, that is not a case that is true in the slightest, because it's either you do or you don't. Not understanding the limits you must put upon people you just meet, rather than embracing one extreme to another, which is a reason why her character doesn't work, because of trust. I mean, please, just stop this. This doesn't work. This film doesn't work. Nothing here works. And of course, this contributes to the climax of the film, where she must realize that she must trust, because she blames her rage against Namari, who killed Sisu, as the reason for everything the way that they are. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. Why is she to blame for her death, Namari? You are the one who actually caused this in the first place, somehow making our hero so lame to realize that her trust issues are the actual problem, and not actually killing the main character because she is actually untrustworthy. Like, this movie never got how they were actually supposed to write their characters in their very story, or the actual story and concept of trust itself. I mean, really, screw these guys, screw this ending, and screw this song. I do not want to waste any more time on this anymore, and trust, because it doesn't work, Disney. And so moving on from that point is back to Pixar and back to Toy Story property in Lightyear, where Buzz Lightyear frankly sucks so hard. A lot of the reasons why this didn't work for me is because he was also the main villain of this very film. Instead of having Zurg as Zurg, they have Buzz as an older version of himself to be the primary antagonist of the film, because most of the film just wants him to correct little mistakes here and there. And of course, the pacing of the entire movie seems awful and doesn't really help the main characters in any way. way. The movie had interesting ideas but just attached itself to existing character to sell it, and that really didn't work at all. All Buzz really cares about is the mission and fixing this one mistake, but throughout the course of the film, he's not the one solving most of the problems in the film, leaving others around him to do it. Like literally, he logs in trying to solve something, but the other characters literally do so in the moment he finishes speaking, so he doesn't really do anything remotely interesting as a hero, where the only time he does this is actually as his evil older version of himself who made this entire army and whatnot, and that was actually virtually it. It really just doesn't feel like this movie justifies its existence at all. And if I wanted a better Lightyear story about him being a hero, then I have the old animated series to watch where he is actually a leader and actually does things that are worth of the hero's journey. And then finally you have Strange World, the movie that no one saw, a box office flop that made Treasure Planet look like the highest grossing animated film of all time. And compared to the previous two movies, and like the sequel movies, it had no villain once again, putting the focus on the familial heroes instead. And of course, it really didn't work at all. A lot of these newer movies somehow work better as series instead, and they don't actually realize that. The movies are too short and shallow to develop any meaningful conversations, and that really doesn't make any sense since Disney Plus exists as a platform which they really could use nowadays with their dropping numbers. But back to Strange World, the heroes are based upon this generational conflict that Disney so desperately needed for the past few years, where it just doesn't work because you want to focus on the strange world aspect of it, and the adventure and the environment and this and that. The characters aren't designed well enough to actually tell a good story, rather than the message that is eventually shallow buried alongside other ideas they try to present. I'm just not convinced by anything this movie did to actually love or hate it, or just anything at all, because it never really gave me that in the first place. It just makes me thoroughly exhausted because they couldn't have features like what Treasure Planet did that actually made their movie right, especially having a villain who's still very sympathetic to the heroes and relating to their family and whatnot, where they just could have benefited from that here instead of this terrible lecture to how previous generations failed and whatnot, where it's just not compelling for me to like it in any way. I could also extend this problem to the live action films, but that is something I do not want to do because I'm thoroughly exhausted by all of these other films, and this was already something I've already kind of covered in my sympathetic villain video, where I rather focus on each of the live action remakes individually and how horrid they are as a whole, rather than the bigger picture to why these modern Disney heroes suck as well. But the main thing I want you to take away from this video is that Disney doesn't understand storytelling anymore, especially when it comes to taking away their villains or even having their heroes. They forget the true value of a character to make these profits and whatnot on a schedule where it's just completely unforgivable. They literally have no qualms about criticizing the best aspects of their former selves, resulting in the most shallow stories that have been ever told. But no matter what the future holds, at the very least I get to talk about certain things, being the one who still holds out hope for what he once had for this storytelling company and dreamed to become the CEO, which is ever fading by each passing day. And with that said, I'm all done, so goodbye.